I walked into my house 4 days ago and knew immediately something was wrong. The air felt different, empty. I dropped my folder with the interview paperwork on the kitchen counter, and that's when I saw it. The fridge magnets were gone. Laura's coffee mug wasn't in the sink. I walked through the living room and the walls had those lighter squares where our wedding photos used to hang. Their bedroom was completely stripped, closets empty, bathroom cleared out. I went to check on the kids' rooms and felt something twist in my chest because their beds were gone, their toys were gone, but someone had left their drawing still stuck to my fridge with tape. My son's crayon dinosaur, my daughter's stick figure family, just hanging there in an otherwise empty kitchen like a middle finger. Then I went to use the bathroom, and there it was, my wedding ring, sitting in the toilet bowl, not on the counter, not on the dresser, in the actual toilet. I stared at it for a solid minute before I fished it out, rinsed it off, and put it in my pocket. That's when my phone buzzed. Duncan, Laura's father. The text said exactly this. Real men don't lose jobs. You lost everything. Come by if you want to cry about it. I didn't respond. I walked back to the living room and stood there in the middle of my empty house with my kids' drawings still on the fridge, and I smiled. Because I'd been waiting 6 years for them to finally show me who they really were. And they just made it easy. Let me back up because you need context for why this isn't the tragedy they thought it would be. I met Laura 9 years ago. Married her 6 years ago. We have 2 kids. Dominic is 6 and Amanda is 4. I worked at the factory doing assembly line work. Decent pay, benefits, overtime when I needed it. Laura stayed home with the kids. Her parents, Duncan and Adele, lived 20 minutes away in a house I've been to roughly 400 times for dinners, holidays, birthdays, random Sunday visits because Laura wanted to see her mom. Duncan is one of those guys who thinks working with your hands is beneath him even though he's a middle manager at a logistics place and makes maybe $15,000 more than I did at the factory. He's got opinions about everything. What kind of car a man should drive, what kind of job a man should have, how a man should dress. Every family dinner included some comment about how I should go back to school, get a real career, stop settling for factory work. Adele would nod along like he was speaking gospel truth. I fixed their cars for free, both of them. Duncan drives a 2019 Ford Explorer that needed constant work because he doesn't believe in regular maintenance. Adele has a 2017 Toyota Camry that I've done oil changes on, brake work, replaced the alternator twice. I did this every few months for 6 years. Saved them thousands in mechanic bills. Never asked for a dime. When they needed money 3 years ago because Adele's sister was sick and they wanted to fly out to see her, I gave them $1,200. When Duncan's roof started leaking 2 years ago, I spent 4 weekends helping him patch it and replace shingles. When Laura wanted to host Christmas at our place last year, I bought all the food, cooked the entire meal, and her parents spent 3 hours talking about how their friend's son-in-law just made partner at some firm. I wasn't blind to it. I knew exactly what they thought of me. Laura would defend me sometimes, but it was always that weak defense where she'd say, "Dad, stop," but never actually push back. She'd apologize to me later in private, but nothing ever changed. I told myself it didn't matter because Laura loved me and we had our kids and our life. Then, the factory announced layoffs. 30 people got let go, including me. It wasn't performance-based, it was seniority-based, and I'd only been there 8 years. I came home and told Laura, and she looked scared. I told her I'd find something else, that we had savings, that I was already looking. She nodded, but I could see her mentally calculating how long those savings would last. Duncan called that same night. I don't know how he found out so fast, but he did. He told Laura she needed to think about the kids, that she couldn't just wait around hoping I'd figure something out, that she deserved stability. Adele called the next morning, and I could hear her through the phone from across the room, talking about how Laura was still young, still beautiful, how she didn't have to settle for a man who couldn't provide. Provide. That word got used a lot over the next 3 weeks. Every conversation Laura had with her parents included some version of, "Can he provide for you? Can he provide for the kids?" I had 2 job interviews lined up. I was applying everywhere. I even looked into going back to school like Duncan always suggested. But none of that mattered because in Duncan's mind, the fact that I lost my job at all meant I was worthless. Laura started pulling away. She'd take the kids to her parents' house for the day and come back quiet. She stopped asking about my job search. She stopped saying, "We'll figure it out," and started saying, "I don't know what we're going to do." 3 weeks after the layoff, I got a call for an interview at a distribution center, about 90 minutes away. Better pay than the factory, actual room for advancement. Benefits started immediately. I told Laura I had to drive out there for the interview, and she just nodded. I left at 8 in the morning. The interview went well. Really well. They offered me the job on the spot, told me I could start the following Monday, handed me paperwork to fill out. I was gone maybe 4 hours total, including drive time. I got home around noon, and that's when I found the empty house. I called Laura's phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. I tried her parents' house number, and Adele picked up. She told me Laura and the kids were staying with them now, that Laura needed space, that I should focus on getting my life together before I worried about seeing my family. Then she hung up. I sat on the floor of my empty living room and started laughing because the absolute audacity of these people was almost impressive. They'd planned this. They'd waited until I left for an interview, moved everything out in a matter of hours, and thought they'd just broken me. Duncan's text was supposed to be the final blow, I guess, the thing that made me fall apart. But here's what they didn't know. I'd been thinking about this exact scenario for years. Not the specifics, obviously, but the general idea of Duncan and Adele deciding I wasn't good enough and convincing Laura to leave. I'd been watching them undermine me for 6 years. I'd been preparing for the day they finally made their move, and they just walked right into exactly what I needed them to do. I got up off the floor, went to my computer, and started making calls. First one was to the distribution center confirming I was taking the job and asking if I could start earlier than Monday. They said I could start Thursday, which gave me 2 days. Second call was to my insurance company removing Laura from my policy effective immediately. Third call was to the bank closing our joint account and opening a new one in just my name. Everything in that account was from my paychecks anyway. Fourth call was to a lawyer because I wanted paperwork started for custody. Fifth call was to Duncan and Adele's mortgage company, but I'll get to that in a minute because that's where this gets interesting. See, 4 years ago, Duncan and Adele refinanced their house. They needed a co-signer because Duncan's credit was garbage from some bad business decisions in his 20s. Laura begged me to help them, told me her parents would lose their house if I didn't. So I co-signed. My name went on that mortgage. I've been making every single payment since then because Duncan and Adele kept having emergencies that ate their budget. Car repairs I refused to do anymore because I was already doing them for free. Adele's shopping habits, Duncan's need to buy expensive golf clubs, medical bills from Adele's sister situation. They'd miss a payment, I'd cover it. They'd miss another, I'd cover that too. It had been 4 years of me keeping their house out of foreclosure without Laura even knowing because I didn't want to embarrass her parents. My name is on that mortgage. I've made the payments, and I just stopped. I also stopped the automatic payments I'd set up for Duncan's car insurance because he'd never bothered to set up his own automatic payments, and I'd been doing it for 3 years after he asked me to just handle it once and never took it back over. Adele's car insurance was the same situation. Gone. That Facebook post Adele made about her daughter escaping a loser? I screenshotted it along with Duncan's text message. Sent both to my lawyer. Also sent them to my mom, who I hadn't talked to in a while because Laura always wanted to spend time with her parents instead of mine. My mom called me immediately, and I've never heard her that angry. She wanted to drive over to Duncan and Adele's house right then. I told her to wait, that I had a plan, that the best revenge wasn't showing up angry, it was showing up prepared. Day 2, after coming home to an empty house, I started my new job. My boss asked if I could work overtime that first week to help with a backlog, and I said absolutely. Picked up every extra shift available, came home to my empty house each night, and sat there in the quiet making lists of every single thing I'd done for Laura's family over 6 years. Every car repair with the approximate value. Every payment I'd made on their mortgage with exact amounts and dates from my bank records. Every favor, every dinner I paid for, every time I bit my tongue while Duncan insulted me in my own house. Day 3, Laura finally called. She told me she needed time to think, that her parents had made some good points about stability and providing for the family. She said she still loved me, but she couldn't watch me struggle and drag the kids down with me. I asked her if she knew I'd gotten the new job. She paused, said no, said her parents told her the interview probably didn't go well because if it had, I would have called her. I told her I did call her, multiple times, that her phone went straight to voicemail. Another pause. Then she said she dropped her phone and it wasn't working right, that her dad was going to get her a new one. Sure he was. I asked Laura when she was planning to tell me where my kids were. She said they were fine, that they were with family. I told her I wanted to see them. She said maybe in a few days once things calmed down. Then she hung up. Day 4 this morning, I got a call from an unknown number. I picked up and it was Dominic, my 6-year-old son. He was crying. He said he wanted to come home. He said Grandpa Duncan told him Daddy was sick and couldn't take care of them anymore, but he wanted to see me anyway. I could hear Duncan in the background telling him to get off the phone. Then the call ended. I sat in my truck in the parking lot at work during my lunch break, and had to actively stop myself from driving straight to Duncan and Adele's house and kicking in their front door. But that's not the play here. The play is letting them think they won, while I systematically dismantle every single thing they've taken for granted. The mortgage payment they're expecting me to cover like I've done for 4 years? Not coming. The insurance payments? Not coming. All those repairs I did for free? They can pay a mechanic 5 times what it would have cost them. And Laura, who stood by while her parents spent 6 years telling me I wasn't good enough. Laura, who let them move her and my kids out of our house while I was trying to get a better job for our family. Laura, who's sitting in her childhood bedroom right now thinking she made the right choice because mommy and daddy told her to. They wanted me gone? They got it. But what they don't realize yet is that I wasn't holding up just my life, I was holding up theirs too. The mortgage payment is due in 8 days. Duncan's car insurance lapsed yesterday, and I've got a lawyer, a new job making better money than I ever did at the factory, and a folder full of screenshots that show exactly what kind of people they are. Let's see how long they keep smiling. Update 1. Alright, so it's been 12 days since I came home to an empty house and you guys have been asking for an update. Buckle up because this got messier before it got better and honestly, I'm here for all of it. First thing you need to know is that Duncan's car got towed 6 days ago. His insurance lapsed like I mentioned, and apparently he didn't notice until he got into a fender bender in a parking lot at the grocery store. Nothing major, just backed into someone's bumper, but when the cops showed up and ran his information, they found out he had no active insurance. In our state, that's an automatic impound. He had to pay $600 to get his Explorer out of the tow lot, plus whatever the ticket was for driving uninsured. I know this because Laura called me absolutely losing it. She was crying, telling me that her dad's car got towed and did I know anything about his insurance. I told her, yeah. I knew exactly what happened to his insurance. I stopped paying it. She went silent for like 10 seconds and then asked why I would do that. I reminded her that I'd been paying her father's car insurance for 3 years because he asked me to handle it once and never took it back over. That I'd paid it out of my own pocket every month because he was too disorganized to set up automatic payments himself. Laura said I was being petty, that her dad didn't know I was paying it. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud because are you kidding me? He didn't know? He got the insurance cards with my payment confirmations every 6 months. He knew exactly who was paying for it. He just didn't care because why would he when I was dumb enough to keep doing it for free? She tried to argue that I should have told him I was stopping. I asked her if her parents told me they were moving her and my kids out of our house. If they gave me a heads up before they put my wedding ring in a toilet. She didn't have an answer for that. Then she said her dad was really stressed and this wasn't helping, and could I please just restart the payments until they figured things out? I told her no. She started crying harder and said I was being cruel, that her parents were just trying to help her, that they loved the kids and wanted what was best for them. I asked her point blank if she thought what was best for our kids was telling Dominic that his dad was sick and couldn't take care of them. She went quiet again. Then she said her dad shouldn't have said that, but he was just trying to protect Dominic from being confused about why we weren't together right now. Right now. Like this is temporary. Like I'm supposed to just wait around while her parents convince her I'm worthless and then welcome her back when they're done playing house. I told Laura I wanted to see my kids. She said she wasn't sure that was a good idea yet. I told her I wasn't asking, that I have rights, and if she didn't arrange for me to see Dominic and Amanda, by the end of the week I'd have my lawyer handle it. She got defensive and said she wasn't keeping the kids from me. She just wanted to make sure they weren't upset by seeing us not getting along. I pointed out that they were probably pretty upset about being ripped away from their home and their father with zero explanation. But what did I know? She hung up on me. 2 days later, Adele called. This woman who hasn't spoken directly to me in probably a year suddenly has my number and wants to have a conversation. She told me that I was being unreasonable about the insurance situation, that families help each other, that Duncan made a simple mistake and I was punishing him for it. I asked her what family I was part of exactly because from where I was standing, family doesn't move your wife and kids out while you're at a job interview and leave your wedding ring in a toilet. Adele said that was Laura's decision, that they just supported her choice. I asked if they supported her choice or if they spent 3 weeks convincing her to make it. Adele said they gave Laura the perspective she needed to see her situation clearly, that I'd lost my job and couldn't provide for my family, and Laura deserved better than waiting around hoping I'd figure things out. I asked Adele if Laura knew I got the new job. She paused. Said Laura mentioned something about an interview. I told her the interview went great and I'd been working for almost 2 weeks now, making more money than I ever did at the factory with benefits and room for advancement. Adele said, well, that's wonderful, but it doesn't change the fact that I'd proven I was unreliable by losing the factory job in the first place. Unreliable? Because a company-wide layoff based on seniority was somehow a reflection of my character. I told Adele that her mortgage payment was due in 3 days, and I wouldn't be making it this month. She laughed. Actually laughed and said nice try. But she and Duncan owned their house outright and didn't have a mortgage. I told her that was interesting considering my name was on the mortgage paperwork from their refinance 4 years ago. That I'd co-signed when Duncan's credit wasn't good enough. That I'd been making the payments for 4 years whenever they had their monthly emergencies that somehow always coincided with the mortgage due date. Adele stopped laughing. She said that couldn't be right. That Duncan told her they'd paid off the refinance early. Yeah, Duncan told her a lot of things, apparently. I said if she didn't believe me, she could check with the mortgage company herself. Then I hung up. My lawyer met with me on a Thursday afternoon at his office downtown. His name is Spencer, and before anyone asks, no relation to Laura's family, just an unfortunate coincidence. He reviewed everything I'd brought him, including the screenshots of Duncan's text and Adele's Facebook post, my bank records showing the mortgage payments I'd made, documentation of the car insurance payments, and the records from our joint account that I'd closed. Spencer told me I had a solid case for custody, that Duncan's text message about me being nothing, and Adele's public Facebook post about Laura escaping a loser would not look good in front of a judge. That the fact they moved my kids out of state without my permission was actually a huge problem for them legally. Wait, I didn't mention that part yet, did I? Yeah. Turns out Duncan and Adele don't just live 20 minutes away anymore. They bought a second property 6 months ago about 2 hours north near some lake community because Adele wanted a vacation house. Except they're not using it as a vacation house. They moved Laura and the kids there. Completely different county. Different school district. They enrolled Dominic in a new school without telling me. Just pulled him out of his kindergarten class where he had friends and a teacher he loved and stuck him in some random school 2 hours away. I found this out because Dominic's old school called me, asking why he hadn't been in class for 2 weeks. I'm listed as the primary contact because I was always the one who handled the school stuff since Laura was busy with Amanda during the day. The school secretary asked if everything was okay with Dominic and did we need to transfer his records somewhere. I told her I'd get back to her because I genuinely had no idea where my son was going to school. That's when I called Laura and demanded to know where she was actually staying. She tried to deflect, but I pushed, and eventually she admitted they were at her parents' lake house. I asked why she didn't tell me. She said she didn't think it mattered since I wasn't coming to see the kids anyway. I reminded her that I'd asked multiple times to see them, and she was the one saying no. She said I could come visit this weekend if I wanted to. If I wanted to. Like seeing my kids was optional. I drove up there on Saturday. 2-hour drive each way. The house is right on the lake, decent size. Probably cost Duncan and Adele more than they could actually afford based on what I know about their finances. I parked in the driveway, and before I could even get to the front door, Duncan came out. He told me I wasn't welcome. I told him I wasn't there to see him. I was there to see my kids. He said the kids were busy, and I should have called first. I pointed out that Laura told me to come this weekend, and here I was. He said Laura changed her mind. That the kids were doing fine without me and seeing me would just confuse them. I pulled out my phone and called Laura right there in the driveway. She answered, and I asked her if she told me I could come see the kids this weekend. She said yes, but her dad thought it might be too soon. I asked her who was making decisions about my children, her or her father. She didn't answer. Duncan tried to grab my phone out of my hand. I stepped back and told him if he touched me again, I'd call the cops and file a report for assault. Laura heard that through the phone and started panicking, saying nobody needs to call the police, that everyone just needs to calm down. Duncan was yelling in the background about how I had no right to show up at their property and make threats. I wasn't making threats, I was stating facts. But Duncan has never been real good with facts that don't fit his narrative. Then I heard Dominic. He was crying inside the house. I could hear him through the open door asking why Daddy was yelling, why Grandpa was mad. Amanda started crying too. Laura was trying to shush them, and Duncan was still yelling at me to leave, and I just stood there in their driveway thinking about how this was exactly what they wanted. Chaos? Drama? Me looking like the bad guy who showed up and upset everyone. So I stopped engaging. I told Laura through the phone that I'd be filing for custody this week and she'd be hearing from my lawyer. Duncan said go ahead, that no judge would give custody to a man who just lost his job and was clearly unstable. I reminded him I had a new job making more money than his middle management position probably paid, and I had texts and Facebook posts proving exactly what kind of people he and Adele were. He went pale. Actually, pale. Like it finally clicked that maybe putting everything in writing wasn't the smartest move. I got back in my truck and drove home. The mortgage payment was due yesterday. I didn't make it. I checked their account online this morning, and there's a late fee already posted. If they don't pay within 15 days, it goes into default proceedings. Their payment is $3,200 a month because they refinanced the full amount when they did the paperwork 4 years ago and took out extra cash for Adele's sister's medical bills. Duncan called me last night. Not Laura. Duncan himself. He told me we needed to talk man to man. I asked him what he wanted. He said the mortgage company contacted him about the missed payment and he needed to know what was going on. I told him what was going on was that I stopped paying his mortgage. He said I couldn't do that, that we had an agreement. We had an agreement. An agreement where I paid his bills for 4 years while he insulted me at every family gathering and then convinced my wife to leave me. I asked Duncan what he thought happened to agreements when you move someone's family out of their house. He said that was different. That was about Laura making a choice for herself and the kids. That had nothing to do with their mortgage. I told him everything had to do with their mortgage. That every single thing I'd done for him and Adele for 6 years had been building to this moment where they'd finally show their true selves. That I'd been waiting for them to prove they saw me as nothing more than a wallet and a handyman, and they'd exceeded my expectations. Duncan said I was being dramatic, that they'd always appreciated what I did for them. I asked him if he appreciated me so much. Why did his text message say real men don't lose jobs, and I lost everything? Why did his wife post on Facebook about Laura escaping a loser? Duncan said he was angry when he sent that text, that he didn't mean it the way it sounded, that Adele's Facebook post was just her being protective of Laura. I asked him if he was going to pay his own mortgage this month. He said he couldn't, that they didn't have that kind of money just sitting around. I asked him what he'd been doing with the $3,000 a month he should have been paying for the last 4 years. He said that money went to other things, living expenses, the lake house, helping Laura with the kids, the kids who lived with me in a house I paid for eating food I bought until 3 weeks ago when Duncan decided I wasn't good enough. I told him he had 2 weeks to figure out his mortgage situation. He asked what happened after 2 weeks. I said after 2 weeks the bank starts foreclosure proceedings and he'd need to find somewhere else to live. He said I was bluffing, that I wouldn't actually let them lose their house. I hung up. Laura called me an hour later. She was crying again, saying her parents were freaking out about the mortgage and asking if I'd really let the bank take their house. I asked her if she'd really let her parents tell our 6-year-old that his father was too sick to take care of him. She said that wasn't the same thing. I asked her why not. Why was it okay for them to destroy my relationship with my kids, but not okay for me to stop paying bills that were never my responsibility in the first place? She said her parents needed help. That family helps family. I told her I'd spent 6 years helping her family while they treated me like garbage. And the one time I needed them to just not actively sabotage me, they moved her out and put my wedding ring in a toilet. Laura said she didn't know about the ring, that her mom did that and she was sorry. I told her sorry didn't mean much at this point. She asked what I wanted, what it would take for me to help her parents with the mortgage. I told her I wanted my kids back. She said she couldn't just move them back, that they were settled in at her parents' place now. I pointed out they'd been there less than 2 weeks and Dominic was already yanked out of his school and away from his friends. She said the new school was fine, that he was adjusting. I asked Laura point blank if she understood that her parents had been using me for years, that every time they needed money or repairs or insurance payments, they came to me because I was the easy target. That Duncan's constant criticism wasn't about making me better. It was about keeping me insecure enough that I'd keep trying to prove myself by doing more and more for them. Laura said I was being paranoid, that her parents genuinely wanted to help us, by moving her out, by telling my kids I couldn't take care of them, by posting on social media about what a loser I was. That kind of help. I told Laura she had until Friday to bring the kids back home or I'd file for emergency custody and let a judge sort it out. She said I couldn't take the kids from her. I said I wasn't taking them from her. I was taking them back to their actual home where they belonged. She said her lawyer told her she had every right to stay with her parents with the kids. Her lawyer. She already got a lawyer. I asked her when she did that. She said her dad helped her find someone a few days ago. Of course he did. I asked if this lawyer knew that she'd moved the kids 2 hours away without my permission. She got quiet. I asked if the lawyer knew about Duncan's text message and Adele's Facebook post. More silence. Then she said maybe we should both calm down and think about what's best for the kids. I told her what's best for the kids is stability and their own home, and their father who actually wants to be in their lives. She started crying again and said she wanted that too, but she was scared. Scared of what? I asked. Scared I'd lose another job? Scared I wouldn't be able to provide? Or scared her parents would be disappointed in her for choosing her husband over them? She hung up. It's been 3 days since that conversation. The mortgage is now officially late. Duncan's car insurance is still lapsed, and he's driving on a temporary permit that expires in 2 weeks. Adele called me yesterday asking if we could all sit down and talk like adults. I told her adults don't move people's families out while they're at job interviews. She said I was being stubborn and holding grudges, that we were family and family works through problems. I asked her what problems we were working through exactly. She said the problem of me refusing to help Duncan and Laura when they needed it. I told her the only problem I had was that I'd helped them for 6 years, and the second I hit a rough patch, they decided I was worthless. She said that wasn't true, that they'd always valued me. I asked her to name one time in 6 years Duncan said anything positive about me to my face. She couldn't. I asked her to name one family dinner where I wasn't criticized for my job or my car or my clothes or my lack of ambition. She said they were just trying to motivate me. I told her it wasn't motivation, it was humiliation, and I was done accepting it. Adele said if I didn't make the mortgage payment this month, they'd lose their house. I said that sounded like a personal problem. She said I was being vindictive. I told her Vindictive would be posting on Facebook about her daughter staying with a loser for 9 years. Vindictive would be texting her that real mothers don't raise daughters to abandon their husbands. I wasn't being vindictive. I was just stopping the free ride. She hung up. My lawyer filed the custody paperwork on Friday. Laura should get served sometime this week. Spencer said based on what I showed him and the fact that they moved the kids out of county without my permission, I had a strong case for at least 50 custody, if not primary. He said the text message and Facebook post wouldn't be enough on their own, but combined with everything else, they painted a clear picture of parental alienation being encouraged by Laura's family. I asked him what happened with the mortgage if Duncan and Adele couldn't make the payment. He said after 30 days late it goes to default. After 60 days, the bank can start foreclosure. The whole process takes a few months usually. I asked if there was any way they could make me pay it since my name is on the loan. He said they could try, but given that I had documentation proving I'd made payments for 4 years while they paid nothing, any judge would see I'd more than fulfilled any obligation, especially after they actively worked to destroy my marriage. So now I wait. The mortgage payment is 8 days late. Duncan's car insurance expires in 12 days. Laura has a lawyer, but she doesn't have a plan. And my kids are 2 hours away being told their dad abandoned them while I'm sitting here in my empty house with their drawings still on my fridge working overtime at a job that pays better than anything I had before. They wanted me to be nothing. They're about to find out what nothing actually looks like for them. Update 2. It's been 3 weeks since the last update, and this situation has gotten absolutely wild, in ways I didn't predict. The mortgage went 30 days past due last Thursday. Duncan showed up at my work. He somehow found out where I was working and appeared in the parking lot during my lunch break. I was sitting in my truck eating a sandwich when he pulled up next to me. He got out and told me we needed to talk. I rolled the window down halfway and asked what he wanted. He said the mortgage company had been calling nonstop, that they were threatening foreclosure, that he needed me to call them and explain there was a misunderstanding. I asked what misunderstanding. He said I needed to tell them I'd resume making payments and the missed month was just an oversight. I told Duncan I wasn't calling anyone, that his mortgage was his problem. He said it was my problem too since my name was on the loan. I reminded him I had 4 years of bank statements proving I'd made every payment while he paid nothing. Duncan's face went red. He told me I was destroying his family, that Adele was having panic attacks over losing the house. I asked him if Laura was stressed about the house or about keeping my kids away from me. He said that was a separate issue. I told him everything was connected. He tried a different approach, said if I helped them with the mortgage for a few more months, he'd talk to Laura about me seeing the kids more regularly. I asked why I needed his permission to see my own children. He said he could help smooth things over with Laura if I was willing to be reasonable. I told him to leave. He said he wasn't leaving until we worked this out. I told him I was calling security. He stood there another minute, then finally left. My lawyer called that afternoon. Laura's lawyer had contacted him wanting to negotiate custody. Spencer set up a meeting for the following Monday. Laura and her lawyer would be there to work out a temporary arrangement. The meeting was tense. Laura showed up looking exhausted. Her lawyer, Margaret, started talking about how we all wanted what was best for the children, that we should reach an amicable agreement. Spencer asked what they were proposing. Margaret said Laura would agree to supervised visits every other weekend at a neutral location. Video calls with the kids twice a week. We'd revisit in 6 months. I asked Laura directly if she was serious. Supervised visits, like I was some kind of danger to my own kids. Laura wouldn't look at me. Margaret said the supervised visits were just a precaution given the current tension. I said the tension existed because her family moved my kids out while I was at a job interview and told my 6-year-old I was too sick to take care of him. Margaret said those were allegations for court. I pulled out my phone and showed Spencer the text from Duncan. Read it out loud. Real men don't lose jobs. You lost everything. Asked Margaret if that sounded like good faith. She said Duncan wasn't part of this negotiation. I told her Duncan was absolutely part of this because he showed up at my work trying to blackmail me into paying his mortgage by dangling access to my kids. Laura's head snapped up. She looked at Margaret and asked if that was true. Laura asked me what I meant about the mortgage. I laid it out right there. Told her that her father convinced me to co-sign on their refinance 4 years ago because his credit was garbage, that I'd been making the payment every month since then, that I had records of every payment totaling over $150,000 on a house I didn't live in. Laura looked genuinely shocked. She asked why I never told her. I said I did tell her. Every time her parents needed money, I explained where it was going. She said she thought I was just helping them occasionally, not paying their entire mortgage. Margaret tried to redirect back to custody. Spencer said financial arrangements were very relevant when one party was using financial dependence as leverage to keep children away from their father. Laura was crying now. Real crying. She asked why I stopped paying if I'd been doing it for so long. I told her because I spent 6 years being treated like garbage by her parents while supporting them financially, and the second I lost my job, they decided I was worthless and moved her out. She said her parents were just trying to help her through a difficult time. I asked if she thought it was helpful to pull Dominic out of school without telling me, to move them to a different county. Laura said her dad told her I wasn't taking the job situation seriously. I asked if she knew I had a new job the day she moved out. She went quiet. Margaret suggested we take a break. Laura and I stood outside Spencer's office on opposite ends of the hallway. Laura walked over to me, asked if I really had a new job when she moved out. I told her I got the offer the morning of the interview, that I called her phone immediately and it went straight to voicemail. Laura pulled out her phone and checked something. She said her dad had put a block on my number the day before the move, said it was to give her space to think, that he'd unblock it when she was ready. I asked her when she'd actually been ready versus when her dad decided she was ready. She asked about the mortgage again. I told her the payment was 30 days late, that if it went 60 days, it would go into foreclosure, that her parents had maybe 4 weeks to come up with $3,000 plus late fees, or they'd lose both houses. She asked what I meant both houses. I told her the refinance was on their main house, but they'd use my credit so they could take out cash. That cash went toward buying the lake house. Laura asked if I was really going to let them lose both houses. I asked if she was really going to keep my kids away from me. She said she wasn't trying to keep them away. I told her the kids were safe and stable when they lived in their own home with both parents. Margaret came out and said they needed to leave. I told Spencer I wasn't agreeing to supervised anything, that I wanted my kids back home. 2 days later, I got a call from Dominic's new school. The principal wanted to know if I was aware Dominic had been having behavioral problems, acting out in class, refusing to do work, getting into arguments with other kids. I told her I wasn't aware because nobody told me he was even enrolled there. She said my name wasn't on the enrollment forms. I asked who enrolled him. She said his grandmother, Adele. I called Laura that night and asked why Adele enrolled Dominic instead of her. Laura said her mom helped with paperwork because she was overwhelmed. I told her that her mother enrolling my son without my knowledge or consent was potentially illegal. Laura said I was being dramatic. Spencer said we'd add it to the custody filing, that establishing a pattern of excluding me from parenting decisions would strengthen my case. The mortgage hit 40 days late last Monday. I got an email from the mortgage company. I called them and explained the situation. Sent them 4 years of bank statements with the mortgage payments highlighted. 3 days later, they called and said based on my payment history, they'd be pursuing the other party on the loan for the full amount of the default. Duncan called me screaming. Said I'd ruined him. That the mortgage company was demanding full payment of the missed months plus penalties, or they'd start foreclosure. I asked how much. He said almost $12,000 between missed payments and late fees. I asked where he'd been putting the $3,000 a month he should have been paying for 4 years. He said that was none of my business. He said I'd planned this, that I'd set him up by co-signing and making payments so I could pull them away at the perfect moment to destroy him. I told him no. I'd helped him like family because I thought that's what family did. That he was the one who decided to destroy everything by convincing Laura I was worthless after one setback. Adele got on the phone crying, told me they couldn't come up with $12,000. I reminded her they hadn't worked for anything, that I'd been the one working to keep their house out of foreclosure for 4 years. She asked what I wanted, what it would take for me to help them. I told her I wanted my kids back in my house full time. She said that wasn't realistic. I said mothers who let their parents manipulate them into destroying their family don't get to play the mother card. Laura called me an hour later. She was at a gas station between the lake house and my place. Said she needed to talk in person. I asked where the kids were. She said with her mom. I told her to meet me at the grocery store parking lot near my house. She was already there when I arrived. I got in the passenger seat and she immediately started talking. Said she'd been going through her mom's papers at the house and found the mortgage documents. That she saw my name as co-signer. That she saw statements going back years with my account information on the payment records. She asked why I never told her how much I was doing for her parents. I told her I did tell her, every time they needed money. She said she didn't realize it was that much, that her parents always made it sound like small favors. I pulled up my banking app and showed her. 4 years of monthly payments. 3,000 and change every month. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she asked why I kept doing it if I knew they didn't appreciate it. I told her because I loved her, and I thought making her parents happy would make her happy. That I thought if I proved myself enough, Duncan would eventually respect me. Laura said her dad wasn't like that he just wanted the best for her and the kids. I asked if the best was moving them 2 hours away and isolating them from their father. She said she didn't think it would be this hard, that her parents said it would be temporary until I got back on my feet. I told her I got back on my feet 2 days after she moved out. She admitted her dad had been filtering information, that he'd told her I wasn't taking the job search seriously, that when I called she shouldn't answer because I just tried to manipulate her. She said she believed him because he was her father. I asked her if she really believed that or if it was easier to believe than admitting her parents had been using both of us for years. She started crying, said she didn't know what to believe anymore, that Dominic was having problems at school and Amanda kept asking when they were going home. I asked Laura what she wanted, not what her parents wanted. What did she actually want? She said she wanted her family back, the family we had before everything went wrong. I told her we could have that, but not if she kept letting her parents make decisions for us. I asked if she thought it was helpful that her mother enrolled Dominic without telling me, that they'd been blocking my calls, that Duncan showed up at my work using access to my kids as leverage for mortgage payments. Laura looked surprised, said her dad told her I was refusing to see the kids because I was too focused on punishing them. I showed her the texts where I'd asked multiple times to see Dominic and Amanda. Laura said she never saw most of those texts, that her dad had her phone and was responding for her because she was too emotional. I told her that her 45-year-old father pretending to be her in text messages was not normal, helpful parent behavior. That was controlling. She sat there in silence for probably 5 minutes, then said she needed time to think, that she couldn't just leave her parents' house when they were about to lose everything. I told her she could leave anytime she wanted, that she was choosing to stay. She said that wasn't fair. I asked what part of any of this had been fair. Laura got out and went back to her car, drove away without saying anything else. The mortgage is now 42 days late. Duncan has 3 weeks to come up with $12,000 or they start losing both houses. Laura's still at the lake house with the kids. Dominic's still having problems at school. But I'm not waiting sad and desperate. I'm waiting angry and prepared. I've got documentation of everything. I've got bank statements and text messages and Facebook screenshots. I've got a lawyer who says my custody case is solid. And I've got a new job where I'm already getting recognized and they're talking about promoting me to team lead in a few months. They thought I'd be broken by now. Instead, I'm watching their world crumble while mine gets stronger. 3 weeks until foreclosure proceedings start. Let's see if Duncan figures out how to pay his own bills for once. Final update. The foreclosure notice got posted on Duncan and Adele's front door 63 days after I stopped making payments. I know this because Laura sent me a photo of it at 2 in the morning with about 15 crying emojis and a text that said her parents were losing their minds. I didn't respond right away because honestly, I was sleeping pretty well for the first time in 2 months. Woke up at 6 for my shift, checked my phone, and saw another 12 messages from Laura, then 3 from Duncan's number, then 2 from Adele, then 1 from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Laura's aunt asking if I knew what was happening with the house situation. The one from Duncan said, "What have you done to us?" All caps? No question mark. Just an accusation like I'd done something to him instead of just stopping doing things for him. I deleted it. The one from Adele was longer. Said this was all my fault. That they'd trusted me. That family doesn't destroy family like this. That they were begging me to fix it before it was too late. That they'd do anything. Anything. That word stuck with me. I screenshotted all the messages and sent them to Spencer. He called me an hour later and said Laura's lawyer had reached out asking for an emergency meeting. That Laura wanted to discuss custody arrangements and was willing to be more flexible. I asked Spencer what changed. He said probably the fact that Duncan and Adele were about to be homeless and couldn't keep the kids at the lake house anymore. The meeting was set for that Friday at a diner halfway between my place and the lake house. Laura picked the location, said she wanted neutral ground. I got there early and sat in a booth near the back. Laura showed up 10 minutes later looking like she hadn't slept in days. She sat down across from me and immediately started crying. She said her parents were a mess. that Duncan had been calling everyone they knew trying to borrow $12,000, that Adele had taken out a payday loan for $3,000 but it wasn't nearly enough, that the bank had sent someone to assess the property value for auction, that they had maybe 2 weeks before they had to be out of the house they'd lived in for 18 years. I asked Laura what she wanted me to do about it. She said she knew I was angry, but maybe we could work something out. That maybe if I could just loan her parents enough to stop the foreclosure, we could figure out custody and everything else. I asked her if she was seriously trying to negotiate access to my children in exchange for me saving her parents from consequences they brought on themselves. She said it wasn't like that she was just trying to find a solution that worked for everyone. I told her the solution that worked for everyone was her parents paying their own bills like adults. She said they couldn't, that they'd been relying on my payments for so long they'd structured their entire budget around not having that expense, that the lake house payment alone was eating most of Duncan's salary. I asked Laura why that was my problem. She said it wasn't my problem, but it was affecting the kids. That Dominic was having nightmares about Grandpa and Grandma losing their house. That Amanda kept asking why everyone was sad all the time. That they were living in a house full of stressed, crying adults, and it wasn't fair to them. I agreed it wasn't fair to them. That's why I wanted them back home with me where they belonged. Laura said she'd been thinking about that maybe a trial period would work. The kids could stay with me during the week and she'd have them on weekends. I asked where she'd be staying. She said probably with her parents while they figured out their housing situation. I told Laura that wasn't going to work, that I wasn't sending my kids back to Duncan and Adele's place every weekend so they could poison them against me more. She said her parents wouldn't do that. I reminded her that Duncan had already told Dominic I was too sick to take care of him, that Adele had enrolled him in school without my knowledge, that they'd blocked my number on her phone and responded to me pretending to be her. Laura admitted her parents had crossed some lines, that she'd talked to them about it and they felt terrible. I asked her if they felt terrible about what they did or terrible that it backfired on them. She didn't answer that. Then she said her dad wanted to apologize to me, that he realized he'd been too harsh and made some mistakes in how he handled things. I asked if Duncan was ready to apologize for the text message about real men not losing jobs, for convincing her I was worthless, for showing up at my workplace trying to blackmail me. Laura said he was struggling with pride, but he knew he was wrong. Struggling with pride. Duncan had spent 6 years crushing my pride at every opportunity, and now that he needed something from me, his pride was suddenly an issue. I told Laura that I wasn't interested in Duncan's apology, that apologies didn't undo 6 years of disrespect and manipulation. She asked what I was interested in then. I told her I was interested in my kids being back home where they belonged, full-time. She could have reasonable visitation, but they weren't living 2 hours away with her parents anymore. Laura said that was fair, but she needed somewhere to stay if she was going to be coming back to this area regularly. I told her that was something she needed to figure out, that maybe she could get her own apartment like an adult instead of living with mommy and daddy. She flinched at that, said I was being cruel. I asked if moving my kids out while I was at a job interview was cruel, if putting my wedding ring in a toilet was cruel, if telling my son his father couldn't take care of him was cruel. She said those things were wrong, but I was being vindictive now. I told her no, I was being done. There was a difference. Laura left the diner upset. I sat there and finished my breakfast because I'd already paid for it and the hash browns were pretty good. Got a text from Duncan about an hour later. Said he needed to see me, that we had to talk before it was too late. I told him I'd meet him at the hardware store parking lot near my place the next morning at 9. He was already there when I pulled up, got out of his Explorer, and walked over to my truck. He looked worse than Laura. Unshaved, bags under his eyes, wrinkled shirt. This was a man who'd spent 6 years telling me I needed to present myself better, and now he looked like he'd been sleeping in his car. Duncan told me he was sorry, that he'd made mistakes, that he'd let his pride and his opinions about what was best for Laura cloud his judgment about me. I asked him what specifically he was apologizing for. He said for the way he'd treated me over the years, for the text message, for not appreciating everything I'd done for his family. I asked him if he was sorry because he actually realized what he'd done wrong or sorry because the consequences were catching up with him. He said both, that losing the house had made him see how much he'd been taking for granted, that he'd spent years looking down on me for my job and my lack of education when I'd been the one keeping his family afloat financially. I asked Duncan why he hated me so much, why from day one he'd treated me like I was beneath him. He was quiet for a minute and then said it wasn't about hating me, that when Laura first brought me home 6 years ago, he saw a factory worker with no degree and no prospects and he thought she deserved better, that he'd wanted her to marry someone successful, someone ambitious, someone who'd give her the kind of life he couldn't give Adele. I told him I'd given Laura a good life, a home, 2 kids, stability. that I'd worked overtime whenever we needed extra money, that I'd been faithful and present and involved. Duncan said he knew that now, that he'd been wrong about me, that he'd let his own insecurities about not being successful enough make him judge me unfairly. His own insecurities. That was the first honest thing Duncan had said to me in 6 years. I asked him if he understood what he'd done by convincing Laura to leave me. He said he thought he was protecting her from watching me fail, that when I lost the factory job, he panicked and thought I'd drag Laura and the kids down with me. I reminded him I got a new, better job within 3 weeks. He said he knew that now, but Adele had convinced him I was just going to keep losing jobs, and Laura needed to get out before it got worse. I asked Duncan if he'd ever once in 6 years considered that maybe I was exactly what Laura needed, that maybe his definition of success and worth was wrong. He said he'd been considering that a lot lately, that watching everything fall apart had made him realize that the things he'd valued weren't the things that actually mattered. I told Duncan it was too late for philosophy, that in 2 weeks the bank was going to auction his house. He asked if there was any way I'd consider helping them one more time, just enough to stop the foreclosure, that he'd find a way to pay me back eventually. I asked him how he planned to pay me back when he couldn't even make his own mortgage payment. He said he'd figure something out. I told Duncan no, that I'd paid enough of his bills, that he and Adele were going to have to figure this out themselves like adults. He asked what would happen to Laura and the kids. Where would they go? I told him Laura could come home anytime she wanted. The kids were coming home with me regardless. He said Laura wouldn't leave her parents when they were losing everything. I told him that was Laura's choice to make. Duncan stood there in the parking lot looking defeated. Then he said something that actually surprised me. He said he'd spent 6 years trying to prove I wasn't good enough for his daughter, and all he'd actually proven was that he wasn't good enough to be in my life, that I'd been more of a man at my worst moment than he'd been at his best, that he was sorry for taking so long to figure that out. I told him sorry didn't pay mortgages. He nodded and walked back to his car. Laura called me that Sunday night, said she was bringing the kids back, that she couldn't keep them at the lake house anymore with everything happening, that her parents were packing up their stuff and trying to find a rental they could afford, that the main house was definitely going to auction and they'd have to be out in 10 days. I asked her where she was planning to stay. She said she didn't know yet. Maybe with her aunt for a while. Maybe she'd try to find a small apartment. I told her she could stay in the guest room at the house until she figured things out, that I wasn't letting her be homeless, but we weren't getting back together. She said she understood, that she'd been stupid to let her parents convince her to leave, that she'd destroyed everything good because she'd listened to them instead of trusting me. I asked Laura if she actually understood what her parents had done. She said she'd been going through old texts and emails, that she'd found messages between Duncan and Adele planning the move, talking about how they needed to get her away from me before I dragged her down, discussing what they'd say to her to convince her. She said it was like reading a script of the last 2 months of her life and realizing she'd just been following their directions. She asked if I'd ever forgive her. I told her I didn't know yet. That forgiveness required trust, and she'd let her parents take our kids and alienate them from me. That she'd stood by while Duncan told Dominic I was too sick to care for him. That she'd believed their lies about me instead of the man she'd been married to for 6 years. She said she knew she'd messed up and she'd spend however long it took making it right. I told her we'd see. That for now, the priority was getting the kids back home and stable. Everything else could wait. Dominic and Amanda came home on a Tuesday afternoon. Laura pulled up in her car with both of them in the back seat, and they practically flew out the second she opened the doors. Dominic hugged me so hard I thought he'd crack a rib. Amanda was crying and asking if they were really staying this time. I told them yeah, they were really staying. We spent the evening unpacking their stuff and setting their rooms back up. Laura stayed for dinner. It was weird and tense, but the kids were happy, so we both just focused on them. After they went to bed, Laura and I sat in the living room and she told me her parents had found a 2-bedroom apartment about 40 minutes away, that they'd be moving in next week after the house got posted for auction. I asked her if they were still blaming me. She said her dad had finally admitted that he'd caused this himself, that Adele was still bitter but slowly coming around to accepting reality, that neither of them would be contacting me anytime soon because they were too embarrassed. Good. I didn't want to hear from them. Laura moved into the guest room that Thursday. We established rules. Separate spaces, co-parenting only. No discussions about reconciliation until I decided I was ready if ever. She agreed to everything. Said she'd take whatever I was willing to give. It's been 3 weeks since the kids came home. Duncan and Adele moved into their apartment last Saturday. The house went to auction yesterday and sold for less than they owed. They're going to owe the bank the difference, plus they lost any equity they had built up. The lake house is in foreclosure now too because it was tied to the main house loan. They'll lose that in another month or so. Laura's been good about boundaries. She takes care of the kids during the day while I'm at work. We do dinner together as a family. Then she goes to her room and I go to mine. Dominic's behavioral problems at school have completely disappeared now that he's back in his old classroom with his old teacher and friends. Amanda stopped asking when they're leaving. My promotion to team lead came through last week. 20% raise. Better benefits. My boss said I'd been the most reliable worker they'd had in years and they wanted to invest in me. Funny how that works out when you're not spending all your emotional energy trying to prove yourself to people who've already decided you're worthless. I saw Duncan at the grocery store yesterday. He was in the generic brand aisle looking at soup cans. I almost walked past without saying anything, but he saw me. We stood there for a second, and then he said the kids looked good in the photos Laura had been showing Adele. That he was glad they were back home. I didn't respond, just pushed my cart past him. Some people in the comments on my first post said I should forgive Duncan and Adele. That family is family, and everyone makes mistakes. But here's the thing, those people don't understand. Duncan and Adele didn't make a mistake. They made a calculated decision based on 6 years of looking down on me and deciding I wasn't worth keeping around the second I showed any weakness. They didn't love Laura enough to let her make her own choices. They didn't love my kids enough to put their well-being over their own opinions. And when it all fell apart, they didn't come to me apologizing for what they'd done to my family. They came begging me to save them from consequences. That's not remorse. That's just panic. I'm not a good enough man to forgive that. Maybe that makes me petty or vindictive or whatever else people want to call it. But I spent 6 years being the good man who helped everyone and bit his tongue and tried to prove himself worthy. And the second I stopped, my whole life got better. My kids are home. My job is better than ever. My house is peaceful without the constant weight of Duncan's judgment hanging over every decision. Laura's learning what it means to be a partner instead of her parents' puppet. And Duncan and Adele are learning what it means to pay their own bills. Turns out being nothing means I had everything they needed. And now they have nothing at all. Real men don't lose jobs? Maybe not. But apparently real men also don't pay other people's mortgages for 6 years and then act surprised when those people turn out to be users. I stood in my empty living room 5 weeks ago with my kids' drawings on the fridge and smiled because I knew this was coming. Everything that's happened since has just been watching it all play out exactly like I knew it would. They thought taking everything from me would break me. Instead, it freed me. And that's the part they'll never understand.